Alright, let's get into 5 more new releases, a few of which were pretty highly anticipated. And I want to start with F1, which I was getting really hyped about as it was coming up, with Joseph Kosinski being in this sort of real action place again, where it was like Top Gun Maverick was, oh, they're actually in the planes and they're actually flying and doing the whole thing. And now it's Brad Pitt and Damson Idris are like actually in the cars, actually racing during actual races and doing that whole thing. And it's really exciting, and he's a director that I'm just like always rooting for. It was really, obviously it goes back to like Tron Legacy and Oblivion and stuff like that. It was only The Brave where I was really like, oh my god, this dude's really something, and then obviously, you know, Maverick happened and this is happening, and he's in a really good place right now, and there is a lot to like about this movie, especially much like he did with Maverick, that sort of old-fashioned feel of movies that we've kind of missed over a number of years, where things, action movies especially, were kind of starting to feel a little fake, and this idea of like getting the actors actually in there and doing the whole thing, that's really sort of coming back to light, and with these, you know, actors that have been around for quite some time, have been stars for quite some time, being the ones doing it too, is really exciting. But this one also sort of ran into some issues with me as far, and that aren't its fault. Mainly the whole thing of something you really don't want to do is go into a movie and be pretty much constantly thinking about other movies, which is something I really try not to do. And so you might think, you know, you go into this and you might, you know, be comparing it to Maverick, or be comparing it to Rush or something like that. But the racing movie that I've just really, really fallen in love with recently, I did when it came out, and I still, like, watch it occasionally, all the way up to now, is Ford vs. Ferrari. And so I was like, for some reason, the problem I was going to have was, I'm going to keep comparing this to Ford vs. Ferrari, and that's going to be a problem, because Ford vs. Ferrari is an extremely high bar in my eyes. So I guess there's also the Rennie Harlan movie Driven with Stallone, which this has a surprising amount in common with. I wasn't expecting that, despite the setting and what the sport is. But, yeah, so that kind of, I felt like, became a problem a little bit, because I kept thinking about a movie that I hold in such high regard. And it was like, well, you know, something like Ford vs. Ferrari feels like it's, you know, scene after scene after scene after scene, whether it's racing or whether it's being with the characters and them having a dynamic and the problems in between the actual racing. And it's like every single scene in Ford vs. Ferrari just works perfectly. And so this one does not have that flow. And like I said, I don't know if that would have been as noticeable if, you know, I wasn't thinking about another movie, which, again, is unfair, that I shouldn't have been, you know, comparing it to another movie by any means, but I did find myself walking away from this movie thinking, that racing movie probably could have used a bit more racing. I think another thing that brings that to mind is Maverick, because I remember walking away from Ford vs. Ferrari, and I remember walking away from Maverick and thinking, like, with Ford vs. Ferrari, it's, well, I love just how much racing was in that. Like the character work was great, and all those other scenes in between were great, but I did especially love just how much of it is the actual racing. And the same thing with Maverick, where it's like they did the characters so well, and the drama so well, and the dynamics so well, but there's also so much of the flying in it. So much of it. And the fact that they were able to find that balance, and do like make what was in between greatness, while also what everybody's there for being at its absolute top level. And this one, for the most part, the racing scenes are at, you know, kind of the highest level. Especially when we get, like, you know, certain point of view shots, or the way they do certain, really just kind of putting you there as it's going on, which is what we were hoping for and expecting coming into this. But it's also a case of, I was kind of surprised when it started and we were seeing the first race, how much cutting there was. There's a lot of editing in it, which is something that I feel like for the most part we've the really good movies have known to move away from a little bit and to kind of let shots linger a little longer, and that helps also kind of putting us in the action, is having as few cuts as possible. And there's, like I said, there's a lot of cutting and editing going on in this racing. That's something that was kind of, it was, I wasn't expecting it going into it. But for the most part, yeah, those are, especially when you look at, you know, the tech of it, like the way it's shot and the sound and the Zimmer score and all that. It is absolutely an experience when you're getting those big moments. When it like rumbles, you can feel like the rumbling in your chest when the cars are going. That's something that, you know, can't be replicated. That's obviously extremely well done and extremely well made, as you would expect this to be given the talent involved. I guess there's a lot of things. I'm not really a sports person in general, let alone F1 or anything like that. So I'm not familiar with like the rules and stuff like that. But I have looked into it and I saw that like there are a lot of people pointing out that a lot of things in this movie are not within those rules, and I guess it kind of really goes off on its own thing about like the realism of the races in that regard. That's something that, like I said, I guess not knowing the sport, that's something that doesn't really, even knowing it after the fact, doesn't really matter to me that much, because it kind of, because I did have those moments of when he was doing certain strategies and certain things during races to get himself ahead. I did have those thoughts of, that seems like it can't be within the rules. What's going on here? But when I was able to get past that, like when they kind of made it feel like, hey, this is the direction we're taking this. This is what this character does, and this is how he gets by. It was like, I'll just go with it. But I was not surprised at all to learn that he seemed to be breaking a shitload of rules, and the movie was not addressing that. But that's something I don't really care that much about. Like, I could probably pretend to, you know, care about that, but I don't really. So, as far as like other characters here, it's a really great cast. It's obviously you've got Damson Idris here, who a lot of people are saying is like kind of it's like a star-making role for him, which is great. He had like a show before this. I think I didn't see it, but I know it was kind of a big deal in its own right too. But like movie-wise, I think this is like his sort of big break role that people are talking about. For me personally, I like the dynamic between them, and especially the rivalry between them, and the way that kind of would go back and forth, and there were times where it was kind of unpredictable of if they were gonna, like, hug or shove each other, and so there were cases where you were never quite sure which one was coming. I did really like that dynamic, but as far as, like, real chemistry goes, I do think it's the Pitt and Bardem scenes that really stand out. And that's something that I felt like we probably could have used a little more of, because we've also, as far as chemistry goes, we've got Carrie Condon's character here, who's like I think she's like the technical director, I think they called it. And I do love her, and I love like her sort of energy and what she brings to different roles, and how she's able to, like, she can also like really elevate a role that's like maybe not much on the page, because she's just got so much of just that factor. And it's, the problem though is the direction they go with the whole they're like each other's love interest thing, and that's one of those ones where it's like, I mean, I guess in one case it sort of fits the old-fashioned vibe that the movie has, where it's like pretty much there was a point in time where like every movie under the sun, no matter what genre, had some love story just pushed into it that may not have been necessary and isn't extremely crucial to what's going on. This more or less, because I don't remember it feeling, it's been a couple of weeks since I saw the movie, so I'm starting to remember some aspects of it, but I don't remember that really changing their dynamic as much as you would expect. So I don't really... I remember coming away from it thinking that didn't really have much adding to anything, and when the movie, like, breaks 2.5 hours, I think it's like 2:35 or something, you really start to see the things that probably could have been taken out and aren't completely necessary. I would say that's probably one of them. Not her character, just the love story angle with her character. I think there's more interesting things you could have done with that character than just make her a love interest. And as far as things kind of veering off and being a little too much within this runtime, there's also some things that feel like they're not quite enough. Like Tobias Menzies is basically like this sort of, I guess, villain, antagonist of the movie, where he's the one kind of trying to pull Brad Pitt in another direction. And that felt pretty underdeveloped. And it has like a really nice payoff that does hit. But once I kind of got off the laugh of what that was, it was like, how earned was that exactly? How often have we actually seen this Tobias Menzies character for this to be that effective? But it's fine overall. Like I said, there's a lot going on. If there's as far as another thing in regards to the movie's length and how it gets to that point, I was sort of taken aback by something else, which is there is a moment in Act 2 that kind of becomes the big dramatic Act 2 moment. And what's really funny is when this moment happened, my first thought was, I think even Driven touches on this, there's going to be, like, without saying too much, there's going to be a dramatic crash. It's a race movie. In Act 2, there's going to be a dramatic crash. So when that happens, I was just kind of like, well, okay, I know this part. They're going to be in the hospital for a bit, and there's going to be some conflict rising about what exactly happened and why and who's at fault, and then we're going to have to wait for this person to recover, and then go through that whole thing, and then they'll get back to racing, and we'll be back in the groove, and we'll be ready for Act 3. And that's how I felt about it the first time it happened. As it turns out, this movie decided we were going to have Act 2 twice. So basically the same thing happened again. And I'm not entirely sure how I feel about that. I get what... Given who it happens to in the two different scenarios, you could say it has two different sets of potential consequences, so it's not maybe exactly the same thing happening, and that's hyperbole, but it felt an awful lot like the exact same thing happened twice in a row. And we watched the same entire act of the movie happen twice in a row. And that's going to really slow down again a 2.5-hour movie. So, a 2.5-hour racing movie that could really use more racing. So, there's that. So, but it does come to the point you want it to in its third act. It does get to... And once again, just to stress again, because I know this might be taken, in a different context, I'm all for, movies being what they're intended to be and what people expect them to be, in this case, a racing movie. But also, like I said, the in-between, the characters and the drama, and, building up why certain things need to happen, where the stakes are in this particular thing. I am fully aware of that, but like I said, movies like Maverick and Ford vs. Ferrari have done this without sacrificing character or drama or anything like that in between, and still managed to be a lot of what they are intended to be, what the most thrilling aspect is, and give that to you in abundance while giving you everything else that comes with that also, and raises the stakes and does all that other stuff. But those movies I keep referencing are also shorter than this, so make of that what you will. But, like I said, though, I'm always going to root for Kosinski no matter what. And this one is, old-fashioned in a great way. There's a very undeniable energy going on throughout it. And like I said, that stuff like, the cinematography and sound, and the Zimmer score, and the top-tier cast, and it's like, there's a lot of things still working in its favor regardless, and it still does its job as, like, this sort of old-fashioned blockbuster thing, and something that we do, regardless of its flaws, need more of, and I'm really glad that it exists, and that the experience of it exists. So that goes a long way for a movie like this. It is just one of those ones where when I sit here and talk about it, like from beginning to end, I'm gonna find a fair amount of things that I would have done differently, or would have hoped would have gone a slightly different way, or maybe been altered in a way. But like mainly like a lot of cutting in the races and the repeating Act 2 thing. But overall, still, I'm glad this movie exists. So there's that. So I can't say that about our next movie, which is M3GAN 2.0, which I was kind of psyched about when I heard that it was happening because, well, to a degree, because I think everybody that saw the first M3GAN was surprised. Where it's like, oh, we'll go and we'll have a campy good time, and we might, laugh at it a little bit, and, but I'm sure it'll be fun. And not only was it fun, and not only did it have many laughs, but also being genuinely good, I think really threw people off. It definitely threw me off. I've watched it like several times at this point. It's really fun to watch with people that haven't seen it. And I really, really like the first movie a lot. So I did feel like I heard a while back, like it didn't sneak up on me, I feel like I heard a while back that this one was switching genres, and that this one wasn't going to be horror and more like action and sci-fi and stuff like that. Doing the T2 thing, where the first Terminator movie is basically a horror movie, and the second one, the villain becomes the hero, and it's more of an action and sci-fi movie. I'm going to assume that's a direct inspiration, given the subject matter as well. So that's a nice idea, and I wasn't against it when I heard it. So just putting that on the table before I say anything else. Another thing I will say is that I have been looking up what people have been saying about it. After I saw it, I looked into what people have been saying about it. And apparently, at least from what I've seen, a lot of people like this one. Like, a lot of people were on board with it, and they say they had fun, and it's, it wasn't anything more than it needed to be, stuff like that. And people seem to have pretty much taken to it. And I have to say, when I saw all the positivity around this movie, I was surprised. Because I didn't have the same experience. So, like I said, I did know it was moving away from horror, so I was kind of prepared for that. But what I wasn't prepared for, I don't think, was... I guess we can talk about the comedy aspect, because it's very prominent here. Because that's something they really lean into, and it's one of, kind of the big changes. But the thing about it is that the first movie, like I said, did have comedy in it. And it was this sort of wry, dark humor. And it starts away immediately with a joke, the first movie does, with that ad for Allison Williams' toy that she's put out. Like, that ad was funny. And then there's several things and dark things. Like I talk about, wry and dark. It's like when the bully gets killed, and then the cop, is talking about it later and chuckles, and then stops himself and says, "I shouldn't laugh." Like, those moments are very funny. But they're also, sort of dark and downplayed and stuff like that. And there's comedy in the first movie that's not downplayed as well. It's just, very clearly comedy. But this one is, going, all out on... It's not, being slyly funny like that, like the first movie was. It's just a, comedy, plain and simple. And I think that would work. And this is another thing I guess I just didn't have in common with these people that found a lot of positivity, is I didn't find it funny. I could tell when it was being a comedy, but I didn't find the comedy funny. That's just one of those subjective things that it's like, okay, that's probably gonna change a lot how I saw it versus how other people saw it, because comedy is very simple, as in, if you find it funny, then you're going to enjoy it, and the opposite. It's very... that's the way comedy works. So, I can say right away that's probably a big reason why I didn't take to it as much as I wasn't taking to it, based on that alone. But also, just with how much they're trying to do at once. It feels very long. It's only 2 hours. I think it's a solid 2 hours exactly. and it felt so long, and there were so many instances where I just felt completely checked out. Like, sort of 45 minutes in, and then, like, past the hour mark, and then as we're going into the third act, I just was really my mind was going way in and out. I just was not invested in anything at all. I was getting, like, bored with it. I hate using that as a criticism because it's very sort of surface level and kind of non-explanatory. But there were just moments where I was just literally bored with it, and it doesn't really go beyond that. And the idea of introducing this new villain, who is certainly, not that I'm comparing by any means, but just, as a statement, is no T-1000. If we were talking, taking the villain of the first movie and making them good, and then giving them a villain to go after, I feel like that's sort of... It's kind of a case where you sort of need... Because M3GAN is such an established personality in this world, and is a personality that works so well and we know so well now, if you're gonna make a villain for M3GAN now, it's gotta be a villain that, like, steals the show. And this one, Amelia, doesn't do that. At least I didn't think so. And yet there is a moment in the opening scene where she punches a dude's head off, and somehow this is a character that does not steal the show. However that happens. And as far as M3GAN being, like, the hero of the story now, and for being a disembodied voice for the first part of that, gave me Venom vibes. And I don't know. I don't hate the Venom movies or anything. I'm not one of those people, but I didn't feel like it was the direct... It didn't feel like this is what that should feel like, if that makes sense. Despite the fact that I don't dislike the Venom movies, I got worried that this started to feel like a Venom movie. Make of that what you will. And there's even somebody that I love in this. I pretty much love anything that they put their hands on, and that's Jermaine Clement. And even he coming in as, like, the stereotypical billionaire that basically wants to control the world with AI and do that whole thing in this very satirical way. When Jermaine Clement playing a character like this isn't really doing anything for me, I have checked out very early. Because, like, this is, like everything should be working at this point. And the fact that... And it almost feels like... I wouldn't want it to get too much into this, but given that setup and, with everything going on in the world, I do think that's something that could have been... Like it feels like it's here, the whole idea of the rich wanting to rule the world with AI. Putting that in here feels like something you really could have put in here and expanded on and really played with the satire of everything. But it almost feels like it's just a setting up point to sort of just make it relevant. And then it just kind of does the rest of its stupid shit. And it doesn't really feel smart in a way that the first movie kind of... Like, it didn't feel clever in the way that the first movie did, as far as having ideas and then sort of expanding on them and then doing some unexpected things here and there with them. But ultimately still being, like, a killer robot doll movie. It was able to have... The first movie was able to comfortably have its cake and eat it too and work. And this one's trying to have a lot of desserts. And it's... And I feel like none of them were landing. I think another thing that just kind of became distracting is I'm not one of those people that needs something to be R-rated for it to be, like, more entertaining. Just adding in fucks and putting in gore and stuff like that really doesn't make a whole lot of difference if everything else is working the way it should. But I will say the bloodlessness of this movie was very distracting, given what was happening. Because one huge compliment I gave the first movie was the first movie did... Because by the time I, did, a review of the first movie, I had seen it twice. One was the PG-13 version that was in theaters, and then that unrated one that was... Unrated or R-rated, whichever one it is, that's on the Blu-ray. And I was really shocked to find that they didn't add scenes. Like, it wasn't like there were gory scenes that were cut out. They are the scenes that are in the PG-13 version. They just very cleverly hid the gore and cut out whenever somebody would say fuck. To the point that when I watched the PG-13 movie, I couldn't tell that those were there. I can tell now that I know where they are, but at the time it was like they hid it so well that it was initially an R-rated movie, to the point that I couldn't tell. And I can watch either version and be fine with it. This one, it's so obvious. People are like being stabbed in the head, like I said, like decapitated and stuff like that. And it's like so... It's just so much more obvious how it's violent while being completely and totally goreless, and it's just jarring. So, and I had heard that there is going to be like another version of this one apparently. I imagine it's exactly the same as the first movie was. It's probably all the scenes we've already seen, just with the blood intact and the gore intact. So but they hit it extremely poorly in this one. It is so obvious that this was probably a gorier movie at one point. So that I don't care for. And there's also stuff here that they kind of try to retread, and it's stuff that I would normally hate, like there's a whole dance thing here. And it's like, yeah, you know, the whole M3GAN dancing in the first one became like a whole thing. Like, it became instantly sort of famous when M3GAN dances in the first movie. But the thing about it is, first of all, there is a lead into it, because it's just something that, you know, they do together, and then it's just something that's in M3GAN's system at that point. But in the context of her doing it right before she kills the guys, there's something in the first movie about it where it's so absurd, in a way, to where it's like, it's this silly moment, but it's also like genuinely sinister at the same time. And I think that works in that context. Here, it's, number one, it's filler, and number two, it's, oh, that thing was popular, let's try to go viral again, is probably what it, at least that's what it felt like it was intended to be. So, yeah, so I just was not feeling this. That's all I can really say, I think. So, so this was like to me, this was like kind of a massive disappointment. I don't want to, it's hard to say massive, because my expectations weren't like, oh, this is going to be amazing, but it's like, I wanted to be surprised, and I was okay with the idea of going from one genre to another, and I kind of feel like now that I trusted them more than I should have, is what I feel like when I say disappointed. So that's how I feel about that. So let's go on to Bring Her Back, which is the new movie from the guys that did Talk to Me. Talk to Me, which is a movie I really, really like a lot. Another one where it was like, there was a lot of hype around it. And, you know, it's horror, which is like my favorite genre, but when I actually saw it, I was really surprised by like the style and how much energy it had, and how fucking dark and bleak it was, but was able to still like have so much life in it, it felt like, while being something very bleak and dark. And it just felt really unique and cool, and just everything about it was really working. The Sophie Wilde's lead performance is incredible. So much going for it. So them doing another movie is obviously going to have hype around it. I don't think I knew this movie was coming. I knew that a sequel to Talk to Me is supposed to be a thing, I think. So this one kind of snuck up on me when it first came out. And so yeah, I didn't really have much time to get like super, super hyped about it. But like I said, I tried to kind of set my bar at a certain place, even if, you know, it's by people that have already been really impressive. Like, just in case, I kind of try to keep things level. But yeah, so as far as this one goes, I like the fact that it feels totally different. Like, it doesn't feel like they're saying, like, oh man, we got so much success with Talk to Me, let's just kind of do that same thing. It's clear they've got, like, a lot of different ideas, which is really exciting. And it doesn't feel like they're sort of retreading their own style. Like you can kind of tell it's from the same visions of the two of them, but it also feels like unique in its own way, the way that Talk to Me felt unique. So that's really great. And I love this setup as far as like what exactly feels uncomfortable about it as we go into it as a horror movie. Because when you look at the way Talk to Me found ways to be like really sort of disorienting and uncomfortable and uncertain and eerie, and it's and where you didn't quite know how it was going to affect you from one scene to the next, if you were going to be, if it was going to be tragic, or if it was going to be terrifying, or if it was going to be gross or shocking or whatever it might be. It feels like the first thing this one kind of really sets up is a discomfort in regards to, there's the opening scene where our two characters, Andy and Piper, lose their father, and then they have to go live with Sally Hawkins. And when we get there, when they get to Sally Hawkins' house that first time, even though she's like a family member, I think, it's like this, the discomfort of being in a new place with new people with an uncertain future. That's something that's like technically non-horror, but is very potent throughout it and very uncomfortable. In this way, that's really effective as far as setting up like that sort of feeling before the movie really gets into like, you know, the horrific things that happen. And the way that Hawkins is with the two of them, how she's totally different with Piper versus how she is with Andy, where there's something like, because we've seen Sally Hawkins play like really comforting people, like in, you know, the Paddington movies, or somebody that's, you know, very lovable, like in Happy Go Lucky or The Shape of Water or something like that. Somebody that's kind of, like, she's good at playing characters that kind of keep to herself, and are just sort of happy in her own way, and very charming and endearing. So this performance is really interesting because she's playing somebody that's like, when we first see her, there's something aggressive in her enthusiasm. Once they're there, that's like uncomfortable in this way, and it's like, oh, who is this character? Like something's off, but you can't tell what it is. But just something doesn't feel like, there's almost too much of a, like I said, aggressive enthusiasm. But then, sort of immediately, this, where she's like really all over Piper and she's dismissive of Andy, comes to light very, very quickly. And there's this especially clever moment in like framing and blocking where it's like she's taking a picture with the three of them, and in the shot, the angle we're seeing it from, my thought was like, oh, it looks like Sally Hawkins is standing in front of Andy. He, like, it feels like he wouldn't be in the picture. That's kind of funny. But I'm sure when we see the picture, it'll look normal. And we see the picture, and she is in fact standing to where she's blocking Andy out of the picture. And I like the way that was done, and it's something that really sets up not just like the way it was executed like that, but this idea of what is this character's deal and what's going on with how she feels about Piper versus how she feels about Andy. Is it something to where she's too close to Piper, or is it something that's making her be particularly dismissive and aggressive of Andy? And like, which one is it? Is it both? And it's like the leaving you with that uncertainty of where is this going, because, you know, any movie should do that, have you feeling like, oh, what's going to happen next, but like that feeling of like extreme discomfort and anxiety of what is going on and what's going to happen when drastic things have not happened yet, and that's great. But I will say one thing was kind of putting me off a little bit as it continued, which is this sort of, and I'll try to explain this the best I can. There's an unpleasantness, and whenever I say unpleasantness, I'm usually meaning it in a bad way, or in a negative way, because there are ways for movies to be unpleasant and effective, and like they're doing their job. And there's also movies that are just unpleasant, and then that's pretty much it. And you can see the difference where one works and one kind of doesn't. One feels like too much. This one, I do feel like is a bit overpowered by its unpleasantness. Like, if you wanted to compare it to Talk to Me, I do think, obviously, there is unpleasantness throughout Talk to Me, obviously. But like I said, Talk to Me had like that style and that energy that sort of made you able to address how unpleasant the movie was, but I didn't feel like it succumbed to it. Like it still felt alive even when it got super bleak and, sad and depressing and dark. And this one feels like it kind of goes into unpleasantness and has a lot more trouble bouncing back and kind of feeling like more than just that. If that makes sense. But that's not to say that it's not effective. It definitely is. Like there are plenty of unwatchably intense moments. Moments involving some little amounts of gore in particular. Little amounts depending on, the movies you're used to. But like there's a moment that's set up with a cantaloupe, I'll say. And that goes in an extremely memorable direction. Somehow unwatchable and also extremely memorable, if that makes sense. And there's a moment later that kind of is that, but then escalates into much more, and is potentially more memorable. And so there is. I don't want to say exactly what it is or too much about it, but it's imagery that will be in your brain for a long time, and unpleasant or not, it's if you can pull that off in any way, that's impressive. So there is that, and as it goes on, it's another thing that's like unpleasant and something that you're not particularly liking, but is also impressive. Is Sally Hawkins' performance as it goes when the character becomes very infuriating. Like those movies where it's like you just hate a character so much and you're so infuriated with the circumstances that there are times where you actually have to stop yourself and say, all this means is that the movie's doing its job and you're feeling what you're supposed to be feeling. So a lot of that, which is great when you're able to put it in the context of what you're looking at and the fact that they have made the movie that they were intending to. And that's the thing too, is like it regardless of if it has flaws or people have certain problems with it, it's extremely well made at the end of the day. Like these are two guys that really know how to make a movie. They've definitely shown that in these first two. I think they came from YouTube also, and apparently the stuff they did on YouTube was like really impressive also. So what's interesting about this, though, is I think one of my biggest problems with the movie is, again, something that's probably unfair to criticize it for, because I'm always saying, because you see criticisms like this a lot, where people are basically asking a movie to be something it was never intended to be. Like, people would say, like, oh, I thought the movie was going to be this, therefore I didn't like it, or the movie should have done this, therefore I didn't like it, or whatever. And it's like, whatever they say or whatever they suggest the movie should have been is something, like, so off the map and something like, well, that was never the movie this was supposed to be, so you're talking about a movie that doesn't exist, and you're blaming this movie that does exist for that one not existing when there's no connection there. This is all whatever you're bringing to the table and saying it's the movie's fault. And what really sucks is I feel like that's what I'm doing with this movie, because I don't know what's saying too much and what isn't. So I guess I'll say right now, if you don't want to know too much, or you think I might be about to say something that's too much, you can just go on or go somewhere else or whatever. There is a supernatural element to this movie. I don't know if that's in secrecy or not. I'm not sure, but yeah, there is a supernatural element to this movie, and I kind of feel like that weakens it. Like, with what's going on in the movie, I personally feel like it probably would have been more effective if whatever was going on here was completely grounded in its reality. Rather than having the supernatural element that it does. It's like it has a sort of possession angle to it, and that's something that feels like it's sort of once it gets to a certain point in the story, it feels like, oh, I kind of feel like I've seen something that feels like this, and then that kind of feels like it taints it as it goes through its third act. And I said, if all of this insanity was going on without a supernatural element, I think my mind would have been a little more blown. But like I said, that's probably a totally unfair criticism, and it's me, asking the movie to be something it was never intended to be. So that gets sort of complicated when you're trying to sort your feelings of a movie out. But overall, like I said, it's extremely well made, and the performances are here, and the discomfort that needs to be here is here. Like I said, there's times where if you're infuriated or if you feel like you're overwhelmed with unpleasantness, a lot of the time that's how you should be feeling, and once again means the movie's doing its job. So, so again, maybe it's also just comparing it to Talk to Me, but yeah, I do think Talk to Me is a stronger movie, but this one definitely has its high points for sure, and just further solidifies that these guys really know what they're doing and are going to be very exciting as they continue doing what they're doing, and we're looking forward to it. So, let's go on to Friendship, which is a movie that it turns out I didn't know much about. I didn't know how much y'all would like need to know about it, but I was pretty excited going into it to find that it was not what I was expecting it to be. I guess at the end of the day, the only thing I knew before I saw it was Tim Robinson and Paul Rudd were in it, and they're apparently friends in it. And it goes from there. And people were joking about how, like, with this and Death of a Unicorn, like, Paul Rudd is, like, an A24 guy now. So, here's the thing, is I do imagine this is a movie where a lot of people's opinion is going to rest on how they feel about Tim Robinson. And Tim Robinson was somebody I was not really that familiar with until a friend recommended I Think You Should Leave. And I watched it. I watched, like, several episodes of it and found it hysterically uncomfortable. And that's when I realized, okay, I guess I'm a Tim Robinson. Like, he has a very clear style, and apparently, given my reactions, I'm a fan of it. So, I feel like how you feel about him, obviously, is probably going to have a lot of bearing on how you feel about this movie, because it does feel like this opening scene right away, when he's in this support group with Kate Mara, who's his wife, who is, like, a year out from having cancer. And the way this scene plays out feels like one of his sketches. There are several scenes in this movie where it was like, that feels like an I Think You Should Leave sketch. And I mean that in a positive way. There's a purpose that he was cast in this movie, because it's a very specific sort of humor and uncomfortable humor that is needed for what this movie is doing. So, what I also found interesting was about like not really knowing what this was when I went into it was, when I hear that Tim Robinson and Paul Rudd are doing this movie called Friendship, and they're presumably friends in it, and obviously things will go certain ways, I have it in my head that Paul Rudd will be the straight man and Tim Robinson will be the outrageous one. And so, going into it blind, what happened was, I go into it, and despite that opening scene, I do see that Tim Robinson's the one that's married to Kay Mara and has the kid. The kid is Jack Dylan Grazer from It and Shazam. And there's an interesting dynamic between them, and we get the vibe into that, but it's like, okay, so compared to like typical outrageous characters in like friendship buddy movies or whatever, he seems like ultimately he'll be the normal one. And Paul Rudd will be the one that's sort of doing his own thing. Like, he's got the band, he's like a weatherman. He appears to live by himself, but then we learn later that he has like a girlfriend or a wife or something. That whole element was like weirdly vague, and I don't know if that was on purpose, but I found myself questioning, like, because you immediately put yourself in the mindset of there's going to be a straight man and an outrageous one. And I like the fact that I kept going back and forth between which one is which. And obviously as it went on, it's like, so there is a certain balance here in that sense, but then it does start to lean a certain way of which one of them is much less of a normal person. And I should have known. So, going into that, that was really exciting to sort of figure that out as it went. So I'm glad I didn't really know anything when I went into it. But, and having these little touches of, like, who like, examples of the kind of people they are, like, with the things that Robinson does. And then, like, with Rudd, there's this whole thing when he listens to Wait and Bleed when they go out to hang out, which is a song I don't think I've heard in 25 years, but I remembered it immediately. And then, like, Robinson, like, picks up, like, and it could be Slipknot in general. I think it was more, but, like, it was really focused on Wait and Bleed specifically. I found that detail really, really funny and really interesting, so, stuff like that, and, like, visual jokes, like when he's, like, sinking in the mud, and he's, like, going out of the frame. And it's like how it starts off as just this sort of quirky thing. And it's like, yeah, he does seem like a particularly bizarre character, but it's also a Tim Robinson character, so that's kind of to be expected. So where is this going to go is what the question became after a while. And yeah, then it does reach, there is a turning point scene where things really change and the vibe really changes. And once again, it's one of those things where part of it is really unnerving, and part of it feels like, and I think you should leave sketch, there's a moment with a sliding glass door. There's a moment, a very memorable moment with a bar of soap, and there's a moment where, like, he goes outside to smoke with his coworkers. And it's like all of these feel like his sketches, so the question becomes like, is this going to be a funny scene, or is this going to be a very uncomfortable, leading into disturbing scene? Or is it going to be a little bit of both? And that sort of unpredictability was really exciting, and as exciting as it was nerve-wracking, and those moments where it's like, I can't wait to see what happens next, but I also kind of want to turn this off. And you're kind of stuck in the middle of that, which once again is a really fun place to be when a movie's working as well as this is up to that point. There's also a hilarious scene where Tim Robinson goes on a drug trip that he's never been on before, in a way he's never been on before, and it's just, the punchline is essentially that it's extremely underwhelming what he goes through. And that's just like its own, it feels like its own standalone scene, that scene. And it's like stuff like that, in a movie like this, with somebody with his style of humor, I just really welcome those moments that are just like, I mean, it does sort of tie into, like, his psyche, and there are several times where we're kind of in his psyche, and the great thing about it is that he's still kind of an enigma in a way, as far as, like, why he acts the way he does and why he makes the decisions that he does. And it's like, we get enough of a vibe of his character that at the end of the day, we're not really surprised at the things he does, but before that, we're never quite sure what's coming. And I love that. So, with that said, I do think there is a point where the movie does run out of gas, unfortunately. It's when we kind of shift away from Paul Rudd and we kind of go down the Kate Mara path more, and, like, their relationship, and there's, like, a whole thing that goes on with her in the middle, and then, like, the aftermath of that, like I said, just kind of sends us down a totally different path, and that's where it kind of started to lose me. And that's, like, I really, like, this increasing sort of distance yet closeness with him and Rudd, and, like, where that was going to go. That's the real meat of the movie, I think, and how Robinson's going to react to the things that Rudd does, or the decisions that Rudd makes, or how Rudd reacts to him, and what the kind of domino effect of weirdness is going to be following that. That's where the movie really shines. But when it kind of detours in this last third or so, it does come back around in a way, but still, I almost feel like it detoured a little too much in that moment. And it kind of, I feel like this was really on track to be something I was really a cheerleader for, and it's like, oh my god, you have to see this fucking weird thing. It's an acquired taste, but just, especially if you get anxious easily. This is it's part of me is avoid this at all costs, but another part's it's kind of a fun ride if you have a lot of anxiety. If you're willing to let a movie use that and take you wherever it's gonna go. But yeah, I feel better about it now than I did when I was first watching it. But I do wish it had been a bit more focused in that regard, in that last third or so. But as is, yeah, if you're a fan of Tim Robinson's style of humor and his show and his sketches, I would say you're going to probably get something out of this. And other people should probably beware, I guess. So, yeah. So, we're going to end on Nonnas, the Netflix movie with Vince Vaughn, that got a lot of really good reviews out of the gate for just kind of being one of the feel-good movies of the year, and I can totally see that. Starting off right away, that the director is Steven Chbosky, who did he obviously wrote and then he made Perks of Being a Wallflower, and I think he did Wonder also. So he has a very good track record for feel-good movies, and not that Perks of Being a Wallflower is completely feel good, but it takes me to a very special emotional place, is what I mean. And Wonder obviously has those really great emotional and wholesome moments also, while also tackling things that are serious subjects also in a way that's not too overly melodramatic, and also manages to be, like I said, kind of have the feel of a feel-good movie. So he's captured that really well so far. And with this, it's kind of the same thing, where there is a lot of, for being a feel-good movie, there is a lot of, kind of inherent sadness in this movie, just where it's coming from. It is a true story about a guy that, who lost his mom and then decided to open up a restaurant with her name, and the chefs are all grandmothers with their own recipes, so it basically feels like you're going home when you're at this restaurant, and just right away, just with that concept, you can imagine this is a feel-good movie at the end of the day. But it's also kind of about grieving and not leaving that part of you behind, the whole that importance of family and it going from the generations, and it's sort of always, food in particular being this sort of constant and this connection that goes way, way back, is this really beautiful thing. And, it is one of those sort of, food movies, what is it, Eat, Drink, Man, Woman, and Babette's Feast, and stuff like that. Chef, the Jon Favreau movie. It is nice that, now Jon Favreau and Vince Vaughn each have their own food movie. And there's going to be a lot of chemistry with the cast here. The chefs in this case are Lorraine Bracco, Brenda Vaccaro, Talia Shire, and Susan Sarandon. An incredible cast, and they have just as incredible of chemistry as you would expect. Joe Manganiello and Drea De Matteo are here also, as sort of part of this extended family, and then Linda Cardellini comes in as a love interest for Vaughn. It's a really appealing cast, and that really goes a long way also. But there's there's also moments obviously the whole appealing aspect of it is the restaurant scenes and them sort of bickering with each other, but then also these bonds forming and all that. But talking about some of these scenes where you know, there is tension, and it's like, I love the realism of it, where it's like, when you hear about people, you know, starting a restaurant and stuff like that, and it's like, most of the time, not only does that not work out, but like, starting a restaurant is the kind of thing that like tears families apart. And this movie doesn't shy away from like the drama that could come with that and the tensions that can come with that. A lot of that you see with the interactions between Vaughn and Joe Manganiello's character, and there's one moment in particular that really struck me where they're sort of arguing about it, and they're in this bad place, and it's like probably not going to work out at this particular time, and Manganiello says something like, he sarcastically says, "Your mom would be proud," and I like the fact that in that moment the camera stays on him and you see the regret. Like, he doesn't immediately like take it back. Like, they fight like over days, but I like the fact that it like lingered enough to where you can see his anger turn to he, without saying it, just you see his face say, "I shouldn't have said that." And it's like real moments like that really just add like just these little subtle things in there just add to just this real feeling that these are real people with real conflicts and real problems, but have like real emotions. Like, they never feel like movie characters, and it's like you can tell that you can usually like true story movies will take like a lot of liberties, but this is one of those movies you can watch and you feel like, I feel like this is probably pretty accurate as far as like how everything went down and the way everybody reacted and the emotions that were involved. Um, and then there's like the moment where like they're making up after that moment, but they're still fighting, and so there's a moment where he says to Manganiello, like, you know, "I got the permit," like that, and that was like one of the big things, like that was one of the big conflicts. And it's like there's a moment where you can see Manganiello's like excited and like he wants to like just drop this and celebrate, but like he's still in the fight, and it's like just moments like that are so real. I love that those are in here between them, and then like I said, you've got all these different like every character with Bracco and Vaccaro and Talia Shire and Sarandon all feel like sort of larger than life characters, but also very real people, like people that you've probably met if they're not in your own family. And just like I said, just the whole reality of this movie is what's really appealing about it. And the rejection especially, where like there's like just like there's so many movies like this, especially something being labeled a feel good movie, where it's like things just kind of tend to happen pretty quickly. And it's like, oh, this was kind of a downer, but oh, we've got this great thing. And it's like, there's long stretches where you just feel Vaughn getting rejected trying to start this restaurant, and you can feel it getting beaten down, and even though you know the movie's going to have a happy ending, there will be moments where you think like, like, is this it? Like, is it over? Like, how can we ever get out of this? This is never going to happen. And it's like, to be able to make you feel that when you know the kind of movie it is and what the outcome is going to be, I love when it can do that, when it can kind of take you out of what you know about movies of this type and put you in the real situation, and you can feel with the characters as they feel it. I really love that. And there's also a moment that's also just really real, where Vaccaro has a great moment where she talks about like when things are really down and it feels like this is not going to work. She talks about feeling unimportant and insignificant, and it's like that's so real. And it's like you just feel that through this character, and it's like, and I feel like you're seeing it here in ways that like movies will tackle that, but they do it with like kid gloves. Like, it's like, oh yeah, this character feels like everything's over, but we know it's not. We know it's going to be fine. And this movie has a way of just really putting you there. It's like when she says, you know, unimportant and insignificant, you just like feel every syllable of that as she's saying it. And it's like and it's a feeling that like you really know and you recognize immediately. There's a familiarity to it immediately as she's going through this. And that's something like, yeah, it's like, for being a feel-good movie, I really appreciate how much of this movie is showing what experiencing failure feels like. And it's like, because you have to have that in order to have the feeling of that success when it finally comes. And I love the movie's willingness to just stay in that and feel that in this real way and not immediately rush to, oh, we're all having fun, this is all great. And it's like, we do have those moments. Like, it is the feel-good movie it promises to be, but it takes you to some really real places that you have to go through before you can get to that feeling, and I really appreciate that. So, well, I think that's pretty much the gist of this one, I think. So we can end this here. So we're going to do more of these. I'm going to go through Jurassic World and do that whole thing. And obviously Superman is out now, so we're going to do that as well. And all this stuff leading up to all the stuff we're going to have in October. So until the next thing, I think that's it.